Hello and welcome to this another part of AZ-900 exam practice questions video on Tech with Jaspal. In this video, we are going to go through another set of 100 questions from our question bank of over 420 questions. And this time, the focus will be on question number 201 to 300. As always, I'll provide you in-depth explanation for each question and validate options while looking at Microsoft documentation in most cases. And we will also try to do things in Azure portal where possible. I'm sure this video is packed with lots of learning even outside Azure Fundamentals exam. So try to go through the complete video without skipping anything, as that will prepare you to answer many more variation of these questions. Friends, many of you have asked whether you can get PDF without taking channel membership. Then yes, we do have one-time payment options as well. You can reach out to us on the same email ID, which is devopshub2023@gmail.com. So we can walk you through those one-time payment options. I'll also stress that taking membership doesn't bind you to our channel, and you can cancel membership whenever you think there is no more support needed from us. So without further ado, let's get into the questions for this part of the series. You plan to provision platform as a service resource in Azure. Which resource are an example of PaaS? Your options are Azure Web App, Azure Virtual Machine, Azure Logic App, Azure SQL Database. Azure Web App, Azure Logic App, and Azure SQL Database are examples of platform as a service in Azure. PaaS services provide a platform and environment for developers to build, deploy, and manage applications without having to worry about the underlying infrastructure. Azure Virtual Machine, on the other hand, is an infrastructure as a service resource where you have more control over the virtual machines and need to manage the operating system and related infrastructure components yourself. Folks, I already have a detailed video on cloud computing service model, so go through the video to understand more about PaaS, SaaS, and IaaS in more details. There can be few questions in AZ-900 exam related to these cloud computing service models. Question number 202 of the series. To answer, drag the appropriate benefit from the column on the left to its description on the right. Each benefit may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Now, on the left-hand side, you have few Azure services. The services are dynamic scalability, disaster recovery, low latency, and fault tolerance. Whereas on right-hand side, you have some benefits mentioned, and they are not necessarily placed in front of the Azure service that is being mentioned. So you need to match the Azure service with the relevant benefit. Now, the four benefits that are mentioned are a cloud service that remains available after failure occurs, a cloud service that can be accessed quickly from internet, a cloud service that can be recovered after a failure occurs, a cloud service that performs quickly when demand increases. The correct answers are now on your screen. When you talk about dynamic scalability, you are talking about a cloud service that performs quickly when demand increases. Then disaster recovery, a cloud service that can be recovered after a failure occurs. Low latency, a cloud service that can be accessed quickly from internet. Basically, you can, for example, you want to browse a web page and the web page is rendered very quickly. That means there is very low latency being in the equation. Then fault tolerance is a cloud service that remains available after failure occurs. Next question. Monthly salaries of technical professional of an organization are an example of operational expenditure OPEX costs. You need to tell whether this statement is right or wrong. Yes, monthly salaries of technical professionals in an organization are typically considered operational expenditure costs. OPEX are ongoing day-to-day expenses incurred in the normal course of business operations. Employee salaries, including those of technical professionals or personals, are a recurring cost necessary to keep the organization running and are considered part of its operational expenditures. Azure Monitor can monitor the performance of on-premise computers. Yes, this is again correct. Azure Monitor can monitor the performance of on-premise computers. By using Azure Monitor, you can have a centralized monitoring and alerting solution for both your cloud and on-premise resources, providing a unified view of your entire environment's performance and health. This can be valuable for organizations with hybrid or multi-cloud deployments. Next statement. Azure Key Vault automatically generates a new secret after every use. Azure Key Vault does not automatically generate a new secret after use. So the statement is incorrect. Azure Key Vault is a secure and centralized service for managing and safeguarding cryptographic keys, secrets, and certificates. It allows you to create and store secrets, keys, and certificates securely, but the service does not automatically regenerate secrets after each use, which is why this statement is incorrect. Let's look at next question. A company is planning on setting up a solution in Microsoft Azure. The solution has a following key requirement. The requirement is to give the ability to detect and diagnose anomalies in web apps. Which of the following would be best suited for this requirement? Your options are Azure Application Insight, Azure Databricks, Azure Logic App, Azure App Service. For the requirement of detecting and diagnosing anomalies in web apps, Application Insights would be the best suited choice. Azure Application Insights is the monitoring and diagnostic service that is designed specifically for web applications, including Azure Web Apps. It provides various features for tracking and analyzing application performance, detecting anomalies, and diagnosing issues. You can use Application Insights to gain insights into how your web app is performing, set up alerts for anomalies, and troubleshoot problems effectively. Other choices, which are Azure Databricks, is more focused on big data and analytics workloads. Azure Logic Apps is for workflow automation, and Azure App Service is the platform for hosting web apps, but does not offer the same level of application performance monitoring and anomaly detection features as Application Insights. Question number 207 of the series. You are working on understanding all the key terms when it comes to international standards, data privacy, and data protection policies. Which of the following choices pertains to the following definition? An organization that defines international standards across all industries. Now your options are Azure Government, ISO, GDPR, and NIST. The organization that defines international standards across all industries is International Organization for Standardization, abbreviated as ISO. The other options, Azure Government is a cloud service offering from Microsoft for government entities in United States. GDPR, also known as General Data Protection Regulation, is a European Union regulation for data protection and privacy. Whereas NIST, also called as National Institute of Standards and Technology, is a US government agency that provides various standards and guidelines, including those related to cybersecurity and information security, but it does not define international standards across all industries, which is why this is not a correct answer. Next question. Which of the following is one of the features of Azure Virtual Network? Your options are geo-redundancy, isolation and segmentation, packet inspection, resource cost analysis. Isolation and segmentation is one of the features of Azure Virtual Network. It allows you to create isolated and segmented network environments in Azure Cloud. This feature enables you to define and control the network traffic flow, set up subnets, and establish network security and isolation between different parts of your Azure infrastructure. Question number 209. You can manage an on-premise Windows server as an Azure resource by using which of the following? Your options are Azure AD Connect, Azure VPN Gateway, Azure Arc, Azure Pipelines Agent. You can manage an on-premise Windows server as an Azure resource by using Azure Arc. Azure Arc is a service that extends Azure management capabilities to an on-premise and multi-cloud environment. With Azure Arc, you can connect and manage on-premise servers, virtual machines, and other resources using Azure management tools, policies, and services. This allows you to have a consistent management experience across your hybrid infrastructure. Which of the following terms represents the ability to increase the computing capacity of a virtual machine by adding memory or CPUs? Your options are horizontal scaling, vertical scaling, elasticity, agility. The term that represents the ability to increase the computing capacity of a virtual machine by adding more memory or CPUs is vertical scaling. Vertical scaling is also called as scaling up. It involves increasing the resources such as CPU, memory, or storage of an individual machine to handle increased load. This is in contrast to horizontal scaling, which involves adding more machines to distribute the workload. Elasticity, on the other hand, is a broader concept that involves the ability to automatically scale resources up or down in response to changing demand. Question number 211. DNS server running on a virtual machine is an example of PaaS, platform as a service. You need to tell whether this statement is right or wrong. DNS server running on a virtual machine is not an example of platform as a service. It is an example of infrastructure as a service. Running a DNS server on virtual machine involves managing the VM infrastructure, including the operating system, networking, and DNS server software, which is why it is an example of infrastructure as a service and not platform as a service. Next statement is SQL Server installed on a virtual machine is an example of platform as a service. No, SQL Server installed on a virtual machine is not an example of platform as a service. It is again an example of infrastructure as a service, as similar to previous statement. You'll manage the virtual machine infrastructure, making it more suited for IaaS offering. If the question talked about Azure SQL database, then this statement would have been correct. Azure SQL database is a platform as a service offering. Next statement is, if you create two Azure virtual machines that use the B2S size, each virtual machine will always generate the same monthly costs. Creating two Azure virtual machines that use the B2S size does not necessarily mean that they will generate the same monthly costs. While the base cost of the virtual machine may be same due to their identical sizes, other factors can influence the monthly cost for each VM. Some of the factors that will influence cost will be data transfer, licensing, storage, and so on. So folks, it doesn't mean if you have created two VMs with the same size, then you will get same bill for them. There are many factors that influence cost, which you should be across while deciding to use a particular size when creating a virtual machine. Next question. When you need to delegate permissions to several Azure virtual machines simultaneously, you must deploy the Azure virtual machine, then there is a dash. Your options are to the same availability zone, to the same Azure resource group, to the same Azure region by using the same Azure Resource Manager template. To delegate permissions to several Azure virtual machines simultaneously, you must deploy the Azure virtual machine to the same resource group. Azure resource groups are a logical container for organizing and managing related Azure resources, and permissions and access control can be managed at resource group level. Placing the virtual machines in the same resource group allows you to delegate permissions and manage them effectively, or I would say collectively. Question number 215 of the series. Resource groups provide organizations with the ability to manage the compliance of Azure resources across multiple subscriptions. Now the instructions are: review the underlined text where resource group is the underlined text. If it makes the statement correct, you need to select no changes needed. If the statement is incorrect, you need to select the answer choice that makes the statement correct. Your options, obviously, the first one is no changes needed. Azure policies, Azure app service plans, and management groups. This statement is incorrect. Azure management groups are used to manage and enforce policies and compliance across multiple subscriptions, providing organizations with the ability to manage compliance of Azure resources across multiple subscriptions. Folks, this is very important that if you are new to Azure, then you should know the hierarchy of management in Azure. I already have a detailed video around how the hierarchy works in Azure. Go through that video to understand the concept. This will help you in answering many questions in detail. When I'm going through that video, I have also explained different limitations and benefits of using management groups and subscriptions. So there are questions around those as well. That video is very good if you are preparing for AZ-900 certifications, as that video covers a lot of basics that you can see in the exam. Your company's developers intend to deploy a large number of custom virtual machines on a weekly basis. They will also be removing these virtual machines during the same week as it was deployed. 60% of the virtual machines will have Windows Server 2019 installed, while the other 40% will have Ubuntu Linux installed. You are required to make sure that the administrative effort needed for this requirement is reduced by employing a suitable Azure service. The solution you recommend is to use Microsoft Managed Desktop. Now you need to tell whether this solution meets the goal. Recommending the use of Microsoft Managed Desktop does not meet the goal of reducing administrative effort for deploying and managing custom virtual machines in this specific scenario. Microsoft Managed Desktop is a service primarily designed for managing Windows 10 and Windows 11 desktop endpoints in an organization. It provides features for maintaining and securing these endpoints, such as regular updates, security patches, and device management. It is not intended for custom virtual machines management, and it does not have any feature for provisioning or deprovisioning virtual machines. To meet the goal of reducing administrative effort for deploying and managing custom virtual machines, you should consider a service like Azure DevTest Labs. So if the solution chosen here was the use of Azure DevTest Labs, then the answer would have been yes. Question number 217 of the series. Which of the following Azure component types can be a part of Azure Blueprint definition? Your options are Azure RBAC, Azure Policy Assignment, Azure Subscription, Azure Role Assignment, Azure Role Definition, Azure Resource Manager Templates, Azure Cloud Shell, Azure Resource Groups. The correct answers are now on your screen. You can refer to the link on your screen to read more about Blueprint definition. And for your information, Blueprints will be deprecated in July 2026. This question requires that you evaluate the underlined text to determine if it is correct. Your company implements Azure Sentinel, which is what is underlined here, to automatically add a watermark to Microsoft Word documents that contain credit card information. Now, the instructions are you need to read the underlined text. If it makes the statement correct, you need to select no changes needed. If the statement is incorrect, you need to select the choice that makes the statement correct. Your options are Azure Information Protection, DDoS Protection, Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, and then the obvious one, if there is no change needed, then you select no changes needed. To implement this functionality, you would need to use Azure Information Protection. Let's look at next question of the series. You are required to deploy an artificial intelligence solution in Azure. You want to make sure that you are able to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics for the solution. And the solution you suggest is you make use of Azure Cosmos DB. You need to tell whether this solution is right or wrong. Using Azure Cosmos DB alone will not meet the goal of building, testing, and deploying predictive analytics for an AI solution. You should consider using Azure Machine Learning Studio here, which is a comprehensive service provided by Microsoft Azure for developing, training, and deploying machine learning models. So again, folks, this question can have two variations. If in the solution it was mentioned, you make use of Azure Machine Learning Studio, then the solution would have been correct. Question number 220 of the series. Which of the following would you use to set up communication between an on-premise VPN device and an Azure VPN gateway through an encrypted tunnel over the internet? There are a few keywords here in the question. The first one is Azure VPN gateway through an encrypted tunnel, and then second one is your connectivity is over the internet. Now let's look at the options, which are Express Route, Point to Site VPN, Site to Site VPN. Now here you are going to go over internet, so you should use Site to Site VPN because it establishes a secure connection between your on-premise network and Azure over public internet. It allows data to flow securely between your on-premise infrastructure and your Azure virtual network as if they were part of the same network. The other option, Point to Site VPN, is used for connecting individual devices to Azure over a secure VPN tunnel. And Express Route is a dedicated private connection between your on-premise data center and Azure, which does not traverse the public internet. That is why I was saying keyword to answer this question is your connection is happening over the internet, which automatically rules out Express Route because it is a private connection. You plan to deploy 20 virtual machines to an Azure environment. To ensure that a virtual machine named VM1 can't connect to the other virtual machines, how should you configure VM1? Your options are: you have two virtual network interfaces, you run a different operating system than the other virtual machine, deploy it to a separate resource groups, deploy it to a separate virtual network. So basically you are configuring virtual machine VM1 here, and you need to ensure that VM1 cannot connect to other virtual machines. So how would you configure it? Separating VMs into a different virtual network will isolate it from each other and prevent direct network communication between VM1 and the other VMs in a different virtual network. This way you can control the network access and communication between VM1 and other resources more effectively. So how would you configure VM1? You would be deploying it to a separate virtual network. Basically, deploying it to a separate virtual network will segregate it and it won't be able to talk to other 19 virtual machines in that Azure environment. Your company is planning to migrate all their virtual machines to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. The virtual machines are currently hosted on the Hyper-V hosts in a data center. You are tasked to ensure that the intended Azure solution uses the correct expenditure model. Solution you provide is you recommend the use of operational expenditure model. Does this solution meet the goal? Recommending the use of operational or OpEx expenditure model is generally a suitable solution for migrating virtual machines to Azure in a pay-as-you-go subscription while ensuring correct expenditure model. Operational expenditure model, also called as OpEx model, allows you to pay for Azure services on a recurring consumption-based basis. This means you are charged for the resources you use each month and you can adjust your usage as needed. As earlier question, this question will also have multiple variations. For example, if the solution said you recommend the use of capital expenditure model, then the solution would have been wrong, because when you move from on-premise to cloud, you are making a move from CapEx to OpEx model. You are the data engineer for your company. An application uses a NoSQL database to store data. The database uses key value and wide column NoSQL database type. Developers need to access data in the database using an API. You need to determine which API to use for the database model and type. Which two APIs should you use? Your options are SQL API, MongoDB API, Cassandra API, Gremlin API, and Table API. Based on the provided information in this question, the two most relevant APIs would be Cassandra and Table API. When it comes to key value, then Cassandra API is the right choice. And when it comes to wide column, then preferred choice is Table API. So there are two parts, there are two requirements in this question, and we have to choose two options which are relevant to those requirements. Cassandra API is for key values and Table API is for wide column. Question number 224 of the series. Which of the following Azure services don't require you to select a particular region? Your options are virtual machine, Azure Active Directory, storage account, Azure DNS, Azure Traffic Manager. So the question is talking about, probably in other words, you need to tell which of the services, Azure services, are global in nature. That means when you create those services, you don't basically need to specify any region. And the services that are global in nature are Azure Active Directory, Azure DNS, and Azure Traffic Manager. If you have done a bit of work around Azure, then you would know when you create a storage account, you need to specify in which region it is hosted. And same goes for virtual machine. You need to select a region where you are creating virtual machines. That's the reason why those are incorrect options, because they are not global services. Whereas when you create a Azure Active Directory tenant, or you create a DNS service, or you do anything in Traffic Manager, you don't really need to select a region, making them the correct choice here. Question number 225. What is required to use Azure Cost Management? Your options are Enterprise Agreement, Software Assurance, Azure Plan, Microsoft Customer Agreement. Cost management is natively available only for subscriptions that are on the Azure plan. To enable cost management in the Azure portal, you must have confirmed customer acceptance of the Microsoft Customer Agreement on behalf of the customer and transitioned the customer to the Azure plan. Only the cost for the subscription that are transitioned to the Azure plan are available in the cost management. There is a link on your screen at the moment. Refer to this link to understand more about Azure Cost Management and how Azure Plan is being used there. Next question. This is again a question which requires you to evaluate the underlying text to determine if the statement is correct. The underlying text is Azure scale set, and there is then a definition of Azure scale set, I presume. Azure scale set enables you to scale to thousands of virtual machines for high performance computing and large scale parallel jobs. You need to review the underlying text. If it makes the statement correct, then select no changes needed. And if it is incorrect, you need to select the correct answer. The options apart from no changes needed are automatic scaling, Azure batch, and an availability zone. And this is incorrect. Your right option here is Azure batch. So Azure scale set lets you create and manage a group of load balanced VMs. However, here the requirement is execution of large scale parallel jobs. That's why Azure batch is more suited for this requirement. Even though Azure scale set is very closely related to Azure batch, however, the requirement is the execution of high performance computing and large scale parallel jobs. That's why Azure batch is the right suited option here. The next question is, how should you calculate the monthly uptime percentage? To answer, you need to select the appropriate choice in the answer area. Then in the answer area, you have three drop downs. The first drop down has downtime in minute, maximum available minutes minus downtime in minutes as option. Then there is a divide sign, and your other options on the right hand side of the divide sign are 60, 1440, and maximum available minutes. Then multiplied by three options, which is 100, 1440, and 99.99. And the correct answers are now on your screen. Monthly uptime percentage is basically calculated as maximum available minutes minus downtime in minutes divided by maximum available minutes multiplied by 100. Next question. Additional costs are incurred by creating additional resource groups in an Azure subscription. You have two options whether this statement is right or wrong. So choose yes or no. Creating additional resource group in an Azure subscription does not incur any additional costs. That's why this statement is incorrect. Resource groups are organizational containers that help you manage and organize your Azure resources. They provide a way to manage and control access, policies, and monitoring for resources within them. Costs are associated with the resource you create within the resource group. So you create more resources, you pay more, but you don't really pay for creating resource groups. Now, the next statement is additional data transfer costs are incurred by copying data from Azure to on-premise network over a VPN. You are charged for data egress in Azure, so this statement is correct. You will be charged when copying data from Azure to on-premise network over VPN. How much you are charged will depend on the volume of data being transferred and the location of on-premise network. Now, the next statement is the Azure spending limit is fixed and cannot be increased or decreased. You can remove the spending limit, but you cannot increase or decrease it. The spending limit in Azure prevents spending over your credit amount. All new customers who sign up for an Azure free account or subscription type that includes credits over multiple months have the spending limit turned on by default. The spending limit is equal to the amount of credit. You cannot change the amount of the spending limit. For example, if you signed up for Azure free account, your spending limit is $200 and you can't change it to $500. However, you can remove the spending limit. Friends, this is question number 231 of the series. You attempt to create several managed Microsoft SQL Server instances in an Azure environment and receive a message that you must increase your Azure subscription limits. What should you do to increase the limits? And your options are create a service health alert, upgrade your support plan, modify an Azure policy, create a new support request. And the correct answer here, folks, is option D, create a new support request. So folks, let's read through this article about Azure subscription service limits and how you manage them. Some services have adjustable limits. I'm reading through the notes section. When the limit can be adjusted, the table includes default limit and maximum limit headers. The limit can be raised above the default limit, but not above the maximum limit. Some services with adjustable limits use different headers with information about adjusting the limit. Now let's read through one of the key statements. If you want to raise the limit or quota above the default limit, open an online customer support request at no charge. This is why we have chosen option D as the correct choice in the question. This is question number 232. Your organization has moved its operations to the AWS cloud and wants to ensure that it enforces zero trust security principles. Which of the following is an example of how the organization can enforce zero trust principle of assume breach? Your options are apply sensitivity labels to all documents, encrypt files in transit and at rest, create a policy that states that all confidential items cannot be viewed or modified, use labels to verify user access to emails. So folks, before you can answer this question, let's first understand what assume breach principle of zero trust means. To address this new world of computing, Microsoft highly recommends the zero trust security model, which is based on three guiding principles. The first one is verify explicitly, always authenticate and authorize based on all available data points. Use least privilege access. This is what you would have seen in many questions. Limit user access with just-in-time and just enough access, risk-based adaptive policies, and data protection. Now, the third principle is assume breach, which is what our question is based upon. Minimize blast radius and segment access, verify end-to-end encryption, and use analytics to get visibility, drive threat detection, and improve defenses. So folks, this principle is talking about encryption. And if you noticed, option B in the given list of options talks about encryption. So we will mark it as the correct choice, which is encrypt files in transit and at rest. If you still have any doubts on why option B has been chosen as the correct choice, do not forget to post them in the comment section. Question number 233. You have an Azure environment that contains multiple Azure virtual machines. You plan to implement a solution that enables the client computers on your on-premise network to communicate to the Azure virtual machines. You need to recommend which Azure resources must be created for the planned solution. Which two resources should you include in the recommendation? And your options are a virtual network gateway, a load balancer, an application gateway, a virtual network, a gateway subnet. So in summary, you need to connect computers in on-premise network to Azure virtual machines. It's more like setting up a site-to-site VPN connection. Since the Azure virtual machine already exists, so I'm assuming virtual network also exists, which leaves us with two components that are needed while setting up a site-to-site VPN, which is option A, a virtual network gateway, and option E, a gateway subnet. So let's scroll through these steps which are going to be followed when you are going to create a site-to-site VPN. So the first step would be to create a virtual network. And while answering the question, I have an assumption that the virtual network is already existing because the Azure virtual machines are already existing and are not getting created now. The next step, as you can scroll down and see, is create a gateway subnet. That is the option E, which we have chosen. Once your gateway subnet is created, you create a VPN gateway, which is option A, a virtual network gateway. And then there are other steps which are at the bottom of the page, which you can see. You create a local network gateway as well. And then you configure your VPN device and create VPN connections. So folks, if you are interested in understanding how site-to-site VPN connection is configured, then I highly recommend you to go through this tutorial. Question number 234. You are leading a team of developers on a project whose goal is to improve customer experience on a credit card company's website. The solution requires custom code without the overhead of managing operating systems or infrastructure. Which of the following cloud offerings would you suggest to your client? Your options are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, on-premise infrastructure, software as a service. Now, there is a requirement of development platform where the developers can write business requirement-oriented custom code without having to manage operating systems, runtime, and middleware. The most suitable cloud service offering this requirement is platform as a service. PaaS provides a platform allowing customers to run, develop, and manage applications without the complexity of building and maintaining the infrastructure, typically associated with developing and launching the app. Folks, if you want to know more about cloud computing service models, then scroll through the channel as I have already a detailed video around it. This is question number 235. Which Azure networking service offers an encrypted public connection between Azure networks and on-premise networks? Your options are Azure Virtual Networks, Virtual Private Networks, Azure Express Route, Virtual Network Peering. Now here you need to establish connection between on-premise network and Azure. However, the keyword here is encrypted public connection. And for that reason, the correct option is virtual private network. If the question would have talked about private connection, then Azure Express Route would have been the correct choice. You plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on the virtual machines are available if a single data center fails. The solution you recommend is you deploy the virtual machines to a scale set. Does the solution meet the goal? You need to choose between yes or no. Virtual machine scale sets does provide you high availability and fault tolerance. However, the solution does not specify that a scale set is configured to use multiple availability zones. That's why this is an incorrect solution. Let's now look at another variation of this question. You plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on the virtual machines are available if a single data center falls. What are two possible solutions? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. You need to choose two options here, and your options are deploy the virtual machines to two or more availability zones, deploy the virtual machines to two or more resource groups, deploy the virtual machines to a scale set, deploy the virtual machines to two or more regions. So you already know that option C is incorrect, so let's rule that out. Option B says deploying to two or more resource group, which won't provide any kind of high availability. So this can be eliminated, leaving us with option A and D, which are the correct choices. You will deploy the virtual machines to two or more availability zones, and you will deploy the virtual machines to two or more regions. Question number 238. Your company plans to migrate all its data and resources to Azure. The company's migration plan states that only platform as a service solutions must be used in Azure. You need to deploy an Azure environment that meets the company's migration plan. What should you create? Your options are, in the first option, you have Azure virtual machines, Azure SQL databases, and Azure storage accounts. Option B has Azure App Service and Azure virtual machines that have Microsoft SQL Server installed. Option C has Azure App Service and Azure SQL databases. And option D has Azure storage accounts and web server in Azure virtual machine. Folks, the chosen option should only have platform as a service offering to satisfy the company's migration plan. And option A has Azure virtual machine, which is infrastructure as a service. So rule out that option. You don't even need to look at other choices in option A, as it won't be a correct choice as a whole. Now, option B has Azure App Service, which is a PaaS offering, but again, it has some form of Azure virtual machine. So let's rule that out as well. Option C has Azure App Service and Azure SQL database, and both of them are PaaS services, so making it a correct choice. We already know that option D is incorrect, as it has references to Azure virtual machine, which is infrastructure as a service offering. Guys, if you don't know the difference between PaaS, SaaS, and IaaS, then check out my video on cloud computing service models. Let's look at question number 239. Select the answer that correctly completes the sentence. When you transfer data to an Azure resource, it is known as dash traffic. Your options are external, internal, ingress, egress. And the correct answer here is ingress. It's coming inside. Let's look at another similar question. When you transfer data out of an Azure resource, it's known as dash traffic. Your options are again external, internal, ingress, and egress. And the correct answer in this case is egress. So folks, you would have seen just a small variation in the question changes the correct answer. So as I always say, don't try to learn the questions and rather understand the logic behind it. Your company plans to move several servers to Azure. The company's compliance policy states that a server named FinServer must be on a separate network segment. You are evaluating which Azure services can be used to meet the compliance policy requirements. Which Azure solutions should you recommend? Your options are a resource group for FinServer and another resource group for all the other servers, a virtual network for FinServer and another virtual network for all the other servers, a VPN for FinServer and a virtual network gateway for each other server, one resource group for all the servers, and a resource lock for FinServer. Keyword to answer this question is separate network segment. The only feature that provides network segmentation in Azure is virtual network, and the option that utilizes virtual networks is option B, a virtual network for FinServer and another virtual network for all the other servers. Question number 242. What should you do to bring Azure storage into your virtual network with a dedicated IP address? Your options are peer your Azure virtual network with an Azure storage VNet, create a site-to-site VPN with Azure VPN gateway, create a private connection with Azure Express Route, create a private endpoint. And folks, the correct answer here is option D, create a private endpoint. So folks, let's read through this article to understand use of private endpoints for Azure storage in more detail. You can use private endpoints for your Azure storage accounts to allow clients on a virtual network to securely access data over a private link. The private endpoint uses a separate IP address from the VNet address space for each storage account service. Network traffic between the clients on the VNet and the storage account traverses over the VNet and a private link on the Microsoft backbone network, eliminating exposure from the public internet. So this is primarily what is being asked about in the question. There can be a different question also based on this, that for example, you need to access your storage service and you don't want to traverse over the public internet. This is one of the different questions that can be formed on private endpoints. So it is very important that you understand what private endpoints are and how they are used with Azure storage. Now use private endpoint for your storage account, and it enables you to secure your storage account by configuring the storage firewall to block all connections on the public endpoint for the storage service. Increases security for the virtual network by enabling you to block exfiltration of data from the VNet. Securely connect to storage accounts from on-premise network that connect to the VNet using VPN or express route with private peering. So folks, I hope now you understand why private endpoint has been chosen as the correct answer in this case. Next question. When using the Azure Site Recovery Service, what Azure storage type does Microsoft recommend for replication to Azure? Your options are premium storage, virtual storage, locally redundant storage, and geo-redundant storage. And folks, the correct answer here is option D, geo-redundant storage. So friends, storage redundancy options will not affect site recovery, replication, or backup to Azure using Azure Backup. However, it does affect in the event of disaster. For example, let LRS replicates your data within the region in which you created your storage account, unlike geo-redundant storage, which replicates your data to a secondary region. With LRS, 3 copies of your data reside in separate fault domains and upgrade domains within the region. From a cost perspective, LRS works out to be much more economical as compared to GRS and also offers higher throughput. However, in general, Microsoft recommends that you use a geo-redundant storage account, as this ensures your data is durable even in the case of a complete regional outage or a disaster in which the primary region is not recoverable. But if your application can be easily configured during an Azure region outage or your data governance requirements restrict replication of data across regions, replication to LRS will work out to be better. So folks, you can now understand why GRS has been chosen as the correct option here, because it provides you with more features like redundancy, and your data is durable. You are protected against region outage, and so on. But in general, you can also use LRS as well. But the recommendation from Microsoft is to use GRS unless you are hit with a data governance requirement which restricts you to replicate your data across regions. Which of the following is a feature of an Azure virtual network? Your options are resource cost analysis, packet inspection, geo-redundancy, isolation, and segmentation. And friends, the correct answer here is option D, isolation and segmentation. You would already know about this if you paid attention to the question number 241 of the series, which was also talking about Azure virtual networks and isolation and segmentation. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comment section. Question number 245. What statement applies to child resources when creating an Azure policy for parent resource? Your options are policies are rejected by all child resources, policies are inherited by all child resources, policies are merged into all child resources, policies apply only to parent resources. And friends, the correct answer here is option B, policies are inherited by all child resources. Let's read through this blog on the Microsoft Tech community, which is talking about the impact of conflicting Azure policies. And let's read through the how Azure policy assignment works section. When you apply an Azure policy at a certain level known as assigning it to a scope, that assignment will be inherited by all the child resources under the scope. That is what answers our question. But let's read through it further to understand how the assignment works in more detail. If I add a policy at the subscription level, for example, all of the resources groups under that subscription will also be impacted by that policy. However, existing resources will not be impacted or modified by a deny policy. They will be marked as non-compliant. Azure policy is an explicit deny system. This means that if a policy assignment in the hierarchy would deny a resource configuration, then it will be denied. To manage exceptions, say you want one resource group to be allowed resources of a larger size that aren't allowed anywhere else in the subscription, you can exclude the resource group from the policy that is denying those resource sizes, and you can assign a different allowed size policy to that resource group. So folks, in the later part of this series, we are going to create an Azure policy, and I'll show you what is explicit deny and how you can exclude certain resources from your policy. So stay tuned and watch this part till the end. Question number 246. In which type of cloud model are all the hardware resources owned by a third party and shared between multiple tenants? Your options are private, hybrid, public, and community. And the correct answer here is public. In a public cloud model, a third-party provider owns and manages all the hardware resources, including servers, storage, and networking infrastructure. These resources are then shared among multiple tenants or customers over the internet. Some of the industry-leading examples are Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. Now let's understand about the different other type of cloud offerings being talked about in this question. In a private cloud model, the infrastructure is provisioned and dedicated to a single organization or tenant. A hybrid cloud model integrates both public and private cloud environments, allowing data and application to be shared between them. And a community cloud model is shared among several organizations with common concerns such as compliance, security, or industry-specific requirements. Folks, if you haven't heard about community cloud model till now, then I would highly recommend you to read about it, as it is something new which has come up in the recent years. Question number 247. Select the appropriate answer choice which completes this sentence correctly. A cloud service that supports a maximum of 20 instances is more than a service that supports a maximum of 5 instances. And your options are distributed, scalable, and secure. A cloud service that supports a maximum of 20 instances is more scalable than a service that supports a maximum of 5 instances. Scalability refers to the ability of a system to handle increased workload by adding resources to the system. In this case, a cloud service that supports a maximum of 20 instances can handle more workload than a service that supports a maximum of 5 instances, making it more scalable. Let's now understand the reasons why other options are incorrect. First one, a distributed system is one in which components are located on different networked computers and communicate and coordinate their actions by passing messages. You would have heard about distributed applications. While a cloud service can be distributed, the number of instances it supports does not determine whether it is distributed or not. And the other option, which is secure, security refers to the measures taken to protect a system from unauthorized access or attack. While security is an important aspect of cloud services, the number of instances it supports does not determine whether it is secure or not. Let's look at question number 248, folks. Your company has data centers in Los Angeles and New York. The company has a Microsoft Azure subscription. You are configuring the two data centers as geo-clustered sites for site redundancy. You need to recommend an Azure storage redundancy option. You have the following data storage requirements. And the requirements are: data must be stored on multiple nodes. Data must be stored on nodes in separate geographic locations. Data can be read from the secondary location as well as from primary location. Which of the following Azure storage redundancy options should you recommend? Your options are geo-redundant storage, read access geo-redundant storage, zone redundant storage, locally redundant storage. And folks, the correct answer here is read access geo-redundant storage. Folks, let's understand the different types of Azure storage redundancies in more detail. The first one is redundancy in primary region. Data in an Azure storage account is always replicated 3 times in the primary region. Azure storage offers 2 options for how your data is replicated in the primary region, which is locally redundant storage and zone redundant storage. Now, in the locally redundant storage, replicates your data 3 times within a single data center in the primary region. LRS provides at least 11 times of durability of objects over a given year. Folks, please pay attention to all the data that I'm talking about here, as these will form different questions in Azure Fundamental Examination. Now, LRS is the lowest cost redundancy option and offers the least durability compared to other options. LRS protects your data against server rack and drive failures. However, if a disaster such as fire or flooding occurs within the data center, all replicas of a storage account using LRS may be lost or unrecoverable. To mitigate this risk, Microsoft recommends using zone redundant storage or geo redundant storage or geo zone redundant storage. Now let's understand what is zone redundant storage and how it differs from locally redundant storage. For availability zone enabled regions, zone redundant storage replicates your Azure storage data synchronously across 3 availability zones in the primary region. ZRS offers durability for Azure storage data objects of at least 12 nines over a given year. So LRS was offering you 11 nines and ZRS is offering you 12 nines. Now let's read through redundancy in a secondary region. For applications requiring high durability, you can choose to additionally copy the data in your storage account to a secondary region that is hundreds of miles away from the primary region. If the data in your storage account is copied to a secondary region, then your data is durable even in the event of a catastrophic failure that prevents the data in the primary region from being recovered. When you create a storage account, you select the primary region for the account. The paired secondary region is based on the Azure region pairs and cannot be changed. So folks, if you don't know what is Azure region pairs, I already have a detailed video around Azure regions. Go through it and you will definitely understand what Azure region pairs are. Now, Azure Storage offers 2 options for copying your data to a secondary region, which is geo-redundant storage and geo-zone redundant storage. GRS is similar to running LRS in 2 regions, and GZRS is similar to running ZRS in primary region and LRS in the secondary region. Now let's read through geo-redundant storage. GRS copies your data synchronously 3 times within a single physical location in the primary region using LRS. It then copies your data asynchronously to a single physical location in the secondary region, which is the region pair using LRS. GRS offers durability to Azure storage data objects of at least 16 nines over a given year. So friends, we started with 11 nines, we moved to 12 nines, and now we are at 16 nines. So you would definitely now understand why geo-redundant storage is better than LRS. Now let's talk about geo-zone redundant storage. Geo-zone redundant storage combines the high availability provided by redundancy across availability zones with protection from regional outages provided by geo-replication. Data in GZRS storage account is copied across 3 availability zones in the primary region similar to ZRS, and is also replicated to a secondary geographic region using LRS for protection from regional disasters. Microsoft recommends using ZZRS for applications requiring maximum consistency, durability, and availability, excellent performance, and resilience for disaster recovery. So folks, again, ZZRS is designed to provide at least 16 nines of durability of objects over a given year. So almost ZZRS and GRS are talking on similar terms. Now comes the third and final requirement, which makes read access geo-redundant storage as the correct choice. We have read through all the different storages till now, but none of them was going to satisfy the requirements that we had, because one of the requirement was data can be read from the secondary location as well as from the primary location. In the previous one, which is ZRS or GZRS, the data was getting replicated to the secondary region, but you could not read the data from secondary region at the same time as that of primary region. So that is why they were not the correct choices. Now, as you can see, GRS replicates your data to another physical location in the secondary region to protect against regional outages. However, the data is available to read only if the customer or Microsoft initiates a failover from the primary region to secondary region. However, if you enable read access to the secondary region, your data is always available, even when the primary region is running optimally. For read access to the secondary region, enable read access geo-redundant storage or read access geo-zone redundant storage. That is why we have chosen read access geo-redundant storage as the correct choice here, folks. If you still have any doubts regarding any of the storage redundancy options, please post them in the comment section and I'll answer them as soon as possible. Friends, this is question number 249 of the series. Your company has virtual machines hosted in Microsoft Azure. The VMs are located in a single Azure virtual network named VNet1. The company has users that work remotely. The remote workers require access to the VMs in VNet1. You need to provide access for the remote workers. What should you do? And your options are configure a site-to-site VPN, configure a VNet to VNet VPN, configure a point-to-site VPN, configure direct access on a Windows Server 2019 server VM, configure a multi-site VPN. To summarize these questions, users who are working remotely want to connect to the VM hosted in an Azure virtual network, and to achieve this, you would need to configure a point-to-site VPN connection, also called as P2S VPN. Folks, let's understand all the types of VPN connections in more detail, so you are well equipped if you have different questions based on VPN connections in your exam. VPN. A site-to-site VPN gateway connection is a connection over IPsec IKE VPN tunnel. S2S connections can be used for cross-premises and hybrid configurations. A S2S connection requires a VPN device located on-premise that has a public IP address assigned to it. So folks, this is basically a small illustration of site-to-site VPN. This is your, on the right-hand side is your on-premise network. On the left-hand side is your Azure virtual network. And through a IPsec IKE V2 S2S tunnel, you are connected basically. On your Azure Virtual Network, you have a VPN gateway, which has a public IP address, then your local network interface public IP address. Both of them are connected through a IPsec IKE V2S2S tunnel. Now, the next type of VPN is point-to-site VPN, which is what was the answer for our question. A point-to-site VPN, also called as P2S VPN gateway connection, lets you create a secure connection to your virtual network from an individual client computer. That is what was our requirement. Basically, the whole of if the whole office connected to a VPN and then they were trying to access a virtual network in Azure, then it would have been a case of site-to-site VPN. But here the users were trying to connect from their individual laptop. That is why it was a case of point-to-site VPN. A point-to-site connection is established by starting it from a client computer. This solution is useful for telecommuters who want to connect to Azure VNets from a remote location, such as from home or a conference. P2S VPN is also a useful solution to use instead of S2S VPN when you have only a few clients that need to connect to a VNet. Unlike S2S connections, P2S connections don't require an on-premise public-facing IP address or a VPN device. P2S connections can be used with S2S connections through the same VPN gateway as long as all the configuration requirements for both connections are compatible. So here again is an illustration of point-to-site connection, VPN connection. You can see on the left-hand side of your screen is a Azure virtual network, and on right-hand side of your screen are different individual VPN clients that are connecting through a P2S tunnel. If I compare it with S2S, you could see there was only one tunnel through which every connection was coming from an on-premise site, whereas in the P2S connection, you have different computers which are making their own tunnel to connect to the VNets. Now, the third type is VNet to VNet connections. Connecting a virtual network to another virtual network, which is VNet to VNet, is similar to connecting a VNet to an on-premise site location. Both connectivity types use a VPN gateway to provide a secure tunnel using IPsec/IKE. You can even combine VNet to VNet communication with multi-site connection configurations. This lets you establish network topologies that combine cross-premises connectivity with inter-virtual network connectivity. The VNet you connect can be in same or different regions, in the same or different subscriptions, in the same or different deployment models as well. You can see VNet to VNet connection is almost similar to S2S connection. You have a VNet on this side, you have a VNet on other side. Both of them have a VPN gateway, and there is a tunnel being formed. The only difference is if we scroll up here, only on the left-hand side of the configuration, there was a VPN gateway, but now in VNet to VNet, you have a VPN gateway on both sides of the bridge. Question number 250. Your company has an Azure subscription that contains resources in several regions. You need to ensure that administrators can only create resources in those regions. What should you use? Your options are a read-only lock, an Azure policy, a management group, a reservation. And the correct answer here, folks, is an Azure policy. Let's go to Azure portal and see which policy you have to create in this case and how it restricts the creation. So folks, here we are in Azure portal. Let's try to search for the policies. Let's go to policies. Then in the definitions, let's search for allowed location. I already have a filter applied. And now let's try to assign this policy and see what all options we get. So first option is the scope. You need to define on which scope are you going to apply this policy. For now, I'll just choose my subscription. And if you want to restrict the policy to be applied to a certain probably resource group, you can choose a resource group as well. For example, maybe we can choose one of our resource groups here. And then let's say you want to exclude a particular resource in that resource group, then you can go to exclusions and then choose a particular resource from that resource group. The resource group which I have chosen doesn't have any resource created at this point. That is why the option is showing as blank. But if you had any resource which you wanted to exclude, you could choose it here. Now, in the assignment name, it says allowed locations, policy enforcement is enabled. And let's go to the advanced features to look if we want to make changes to anything. We really don't want. And if we go to parameters, that's where you specify which of the locations are allowed. So for example, let's say I'm going to allow Australia location. So the users are allowed to create resources in Australia location. You can choose any other location. It allows you to select multiple options. Now in remediation, you can see by default, this assignment will only take effect on newly created resources. Existing resources can be updated via remediation task after the policy is assigned. For deploy, if not exist policies, the remediation task will deploy the specified template. Folks, as I was explaining earlier, it is not going to remediate all the existing resources. They will just be reported as non-compliant. And here you can define what is the message if any non-compliant resource is showing up. You can keep a custom message which shows up when there is any non-compliant resources, and then you'll just create the policy. Let's understand why other options are incorrect, friends. The read-only locks are used to prevent users from deleting or modifying a resource. They do not restrict the creation of new resources. Management groups are used to organize subscriptions and apply governance conditions to them. They do not restrict the creation of new resources. Reservations are used to prepay for specific services for a defined period of time. They do not restrict the creation of new resources, which is why option B, an Azure policy, was the correct choice here. Friends, let's look at question number 251 of the series. Which of the following statements about Azure resource locks in Microsoft Azure is true? And your options are: if two different administrators add locks to the same resource, then the most restrictive lock is applied. A delete lock is more restrictive than a read-only lock. A locked resource can only be deleted by an administrator. If you want to apply a lock to all the resources in a resource group, you have to apply the lock to each resource individually. And folks, the correct answer here is option A. If two different administrators add locks to the same resource, then the most restrictive lock is applied. Let's look at why other options are incorrect. A read lock is more restrictive than delete lock, as it restricts delete and modification both, which is why statement 2 is incorrect. And the third statement is incorrect, as even an administrator can't delete a locked resource. They will have to remove the lock first and then attempt resource deletion. And regarding the last statement, if you want to apply lock to all resources in a resource group, then you can also achieve this by applying lock to resource group, as resources in a resource group inherit lock. So you don't really need to apply lock to each resource individually. Question number 252. Now you are going to be presented with a series of statements and you need to tell whether the statement is right or wrong. And the first statement is Azure PowerShell modules can be installed on Mac OS. And this statement is correct. You can install Azure PowerShell modules on Mac OS. Azure PowerShell module is a roll-up module. Installing it downloads the generally available AZ PowerShell modules and makes their commandlets available for use. The only prerequisite it has is you need to have a supported version of PowerShell 7 or higher installed. And the installation is pretty straightforward. You open the terminal or other shell host application and run posh to start PowerShell. Use the install module commandlet to install the AZ PowerShell module. Basically, the name is AZ, the module name is AZ, repository is PS Gallery because you are going to install it from the PowerShell gallery, and you are using dashboards to ensure that the command runs successfully using the force method. Now, if you do not have PowerShell installed on Mac OS, then you need to follow these steps which are on a different document which says installing PowerShell on Mac OS. PowerShell 7 or higher requires Mac OS 11 and higher. So this again can be a different question whether you can install PowerShell or Mac OS or not, and if it can be supported, what version of Mac OS is needed. All packages are available on our GitHub releases page. After the package is installed, run POSH from a terminal. Before installing, check the list of supported versions below. So folks, I hope now you understand how to install AZ PowerShell and the standard PowerShell on Mac OS. And the next statement, which is question number 253, is two Azure subscriptions can be merged into a single subscription. And friends, this statement is incorrect. You cannot merge two subscriptions into a single one. However, you can move resources from one subscription to another. Azure Cosmos DB is an example of software as a service SaaS. And this statement is again incorrect. Azure Cosmos DB is a fully managed platform as a service offering. Question number 255. In Azure App Service, a or an dash is the compute resource that Azure provides for hosting a website or web application. And your options are Azure Application Template, App Service Deployment Slot, App Service Plan, App Service Pipeline. And the correct answer here is option C, App Service Plan. So as you can see, an app service always runs in an app service plan. In addition, Azure Functions can also has the option of running in an app service plan. An app service plan defines a set of compute resources for a web app to run. This is what is being asked about in the question regarding the compute resources. And now you know app service plan is the correct answer. When you create an app service plan in a certain region, a set of compute resources is created for that plan in that region. Whatever apps you put into this app service plan run on these compute resources as defined by your app service plan. Each app service plan defines operating system, whether it is a Windows operating system or a Linux. It defines the region, in which region your compute resources are hosted. Then it defines the number of VM instances. It also defines the size of VM instance, whether it is small, medium, or large. It also defines the pricing tier, whether you are using a free, shared, basic, standard, premium, or other premium tiers which are available. Which Azure storage replication option provides maximum durability within a single region? Your options are geo-redundant storage, locally redundant storage, read access geo-redundant storage, zone redundant storage. Keyword to answer this question is durability within a single region. Since we are looking for durability within a single region, so you can automatically rule out geo-redundant storage and read access geo-redundant storage, since they are more suited for cross-region replication and other functionalities. And folks, out of LRS and ZRS, you will choose ZRS in this case, as LRS just provides you redundancy against rack failure within a single data center, whereas ZRS protects you against a data center failure. That is why it provides you maximum durability within a single region. Let's look at question number 257. Which of the following is an example of a way in which Azure Advisor can help manage costs? And your options are: you can use Azure Advisor to identify underutilized machines so you can resize them. You can use Azure Advisor to identify your subscription by name, location, and value. You can use Azure Advisor to find less expensive third-party solutions that run on Azure. You can use Azure Advisor to compare your current data center costs to running the same workloads on Azure. And friends, the right answer here is option A. You can use Azure Advisor to identify underutilized machines so you can resize them. So as you can see on this Microsoft documentation article, which is talking about reduce service costs by using Azure Advisor, Azure Advisor helps you optimize and reduce your overall Azure spend by identifying idle and underutilized resources. You can get cost recommendations from the cost tab on the Azure Advisor dashboard. So Azure Advisor uses machine learning algorithm to identify low utilization and to identify the ideal recommendations to ensure optimal uses of virtual machines and virtual machine scale sets. The recommended actions are shut down or resize specific to the resources being evaluated. Now, shutdown, you can see there are some shutdown recommendations that it makes. Recommendation criteria include CPU and outbound network utilization metrics. Memory isn't considered since we found that CPU and outbound network utilization are sufficient. The last 7 days of utilization data are analyzed. You can change your look back period in the configuration. The available look back periods are 7, 14, 21, 30, 60, and 90 days. After you change the look back period, it might take up to 48 hours for the recommendations to be updated. And the metrics are sampled every 30 seconds, aggregated to 1 minute, and then further aggregated to 30 minutes. On virtual machine scale sets, the metrics from individual virtual machines are aggregated using the average of the metrics across instances. A shutdown recommendation is created if P95 of the maximum value of CPU utilization summed across all cores is less than 3%, P100 of average CPU in last 3 days is less than or equals to 2%, and outbound network utilization is less than 2% over a 7-day period. Now, the resize SKU recommendations, when they are made, advisor recommends resizing virtual machines when it's possible to fit the current load on a more appropriate SKU, which is less expensive. On virtual machine scale sets, advisor recommends resizing when it's possible to fit the current load on a more appropriate, cheaper SKU or a lower number of instances of the same SKU. Recommendation criteria include CPU, memory, and outbound network utilization. In the first one, where the shutdown recommendations were being made, the criteria also included outbound network utilization, and it did not include memory. But here in the resize one, it is including CPU, memory, and outbound. The last 7 days of utilization data are analyzed. Note that you can change your look back period just like the shutdown recommendations. You are able to change the look back period here as well. Then again the metrics are sampled 30 seconds, and then an appropriate SKU for virtual machine or instance count for virtual machine scale set resources is determined based on the following criteria. Let's read through this criteria. Performance of the workloads on the new SKU won't be impacted. Target for user-facing workloads, P95 of CPU and outbound network utilization at 40% or lower on the recommended SKU. P100 of memory utilization at 60% or less on the recommended SKU. Shutdown was taking these things into consideration, but the threshold was way less than what is being talked about in the resize requirements. Now, folks, I will not go through all the documentation. If you are interested in reading more about this, the link is already available on your screen. Go through the link to understand more about it. This is question number 258 of the series. Which of the following resources are mandatory for building an Azure virtual machine? You need to choose two options here, and your options are public IP address, network interface, data disks, and OS disks. Network interface and OS disks are mandatory requirements when building a Azure virtual machine. Data disk and public IP address are optional resources and are used based on the requirement. For example, you are building something which needs to be publicly accessible outside of your Azure network. You would bring public IP address in picture. And let's say if you have lots of data requirements, OS disks are by default needed because the OS is installed in the OS disk, which is usually C drive. But let's say you have a requirement to have a separate disk for storing data, so you'll create a data disk. But it is not a primary requirement to spin up a virtual machines. When you are spinning up the virtual machine, you just need OS disk and not data disk. Question number 259. Which of the following should you enable to link to a service that's powered by Azure Private Link? And your options are public endpoint, private endpoint, a virtual private network, and a public network. And folks, the correct answer here is option B, private endpoint. So Azure Private Link enables you to access Azure PaaS services, for example, Azure Storage and SQL Database and Azure Hosted Customer-Owned Partner Services over a private endpoint in your virtual network. So I hope you now understand why private endpoint has been chosen as the correct answer here. A private endpoint is a network interface that uses a private IP address from your virtual network. This network interface connects you privately and securely to a service that's powered by Azure Private Link. This is what was asked in the question. By enabling a private endpoint, you are bringing the service into your virtual network. This service could be an Azure service such as Azure Storage, Azure Cosmos DB, Azure SQL Database, your own service using private link service. What are the properties of private endpoint? It has a name, it has a subnet, it has a private link resource, it has a target sub-resource. You need to define a connection approval method, you have request message, and you get to know the connection status. So as you are creating private endpoints, consider the following. Basically, private endpoints enable connectivity between the customer from the same virtual network, regionally peered virtual networks, globally peered virtual networks, on-premise environments that use VPN or express route, services that are powered by private link. Network connections can be initiated only by clients that are connecting to the private endpoint. Service providers don't have a routing configurations to create connections into service customers. Connections can be established in a single direction only. A read-only network interface is automatically created for the lifecycle of the private endpoint. And the private endpoint must be deployed in the same region and subscription as the virtual network. This can form one of the questions in the AZ-900 exam that what is the requirement when deploying a private endpoint? And the option can be deployed in the same region, deployed in a different region, deployed in the same subscription, or deployed in a different subscription, and so on. The private link resources can be deployed in a different region than the one for the virtual network and private endpoint. Multiple private endpoints can be created with the same private link resource for a single network using a common DNS server configuration. The recommended practice is to use a single private endpoint for a specified private link resource. Multiple private endpoints can be created on the same or different subnet within the same virtual network. There are limits to the number of private endpoints you can create in a subscription. The subscription that contains the private link resource must be registered with the Microsoft Network Resource Provider. The subscription that contains the private endpoint must also be registered with the Microsoft Network Resource Provider. So friends, I hope now you have more idea around what is private endpoint, what are its properties, and what should be the considerations when you are creating a private endpoint. Question number 260 of the series. A dash for a managed instance enables data access to your managed instance from outside the virtual network. Your options are private endpoint, public endpoint, secure endpoint, and network endpoint. And friends, the correct answer here is option B, public endpoint. So friends, previously we went through the private endpoint article and now we are going to go through the public endpoint article. I hope you do not have any confusions between them. If you have any confusions, please post your doubts in the comment section and I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. Public endpoints for Azure SQL managed instance enable data access to your managed instance from outside the virtual network. You are able to access your managed instance from multi-tenant Azure services like Power BI, Azure App Service, or an on-premise network. By using the public endpoint on a managed instance, you don't need to use a VPN, which can help avoid VPN throughput issues. Let's now look at why other options are incorrect. Option A, private endpoint provides secure access to the managed instance from within the same virtual network or from peered virtual network. It does not require exposure to public internet. This is one of the reasons, one of the differences between private endpoint and public endpoint. Folks, there can be questions where you'll get both of these in answers. So if you don't have clarity between private endpoint and public endpoint, you can get confused while choosing the options. So make sure to understand both of these concepts clearly. Option C, secure endpoint could be a term used in various contexts. It's not a standard Azure term specifically related to managed instance. So just a distractor here. Similarly, network endpoint is also a distractor here. This term is not commonly used in the context of Azure managed instances. It may refer to different networking concepts, but it's not specific to enabling data access to a managed instance from outside the virtual network. This is question number 261 of the series, friends. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is availability zones are implemented in all regions. This statement is incorrect, friends. Not all regions support availability zones at the moment. So on your screen is a table showing the regions that currently support availability zones. And if I click on Azure geographies, you can see there are a lot more geographies than what you could see in the table. If you go to Asia Pacific region, you have East Asia, you have Southeast Asia. Similarly, if you go to Australia, you have Australia Central, Australia East, Australia Southeast. If you go to India, you have Central India, India South Central, South India. And if I go back, you can see when we were talking about Asia Pacific, there was only Central India mentioned from that zone. Similarly, there are many more regions missing here, which were there in the global footprint of Azure. So we can safely say that not all the regions support availability zones. Now the next statement is only virtual machines that run Windows Server can be created in availability zones. And friends, this statement is also incorrect. You can run Linux VMs as well in availability zones. The third statement is availability zones are used to replicate data and applications to multiple regions. And this statement is also incorrect because region pairs are used to replicate data and applications to multiple regions, not availability zones. Availability zones replicate your data within a region. Friends, as usual, pay attention to keywords. If we change multiple regions to within a region, then this statement becomes true. Question number 260. You plan to deploy a critical line of business application to Azure. The application will run on an Azure virtual machine. You need to recommend a deployment solution for the application. The solution must provide a guaranteed availability of 99.99%. What is the minimum number of virtual machines and the minimum number of availability zones you should recommend for this deployment? And the first part of the question talks about minimum number of virtual machines. And folks, the minimum number of virtual machines would be 2. And the next part of the question is minimum number of availability zones. And minimum number of availability zones will also be 2. You need a minimum of 2 virtual machines with each one located in a different availability zone to achieve a guaranteed availability of 99.99%. Friends, on your screen is a document which is available on Azure China's website regarding the SLA of virtual machines. And this is what has helped me in answering the question and ensuring that I am choosing right options. For all virtual machines that have 2 or more instances deployed across 2 or more availability zones in the same Azure region, we guarantee you will have virtual machine connectivity to at least one instance at least 99.99% of the time. Let's look at other statements as well, so we know if there is a variation of this question in exam and what we need to choose. For all virtual machines that have 2 or more instances deployed in the same availability set or in the same dedicated host group, we guarantee you will have virtual machine connectivity to at least one instance at least 99.95% of the time. Folks, if you don't know the difference between availability set and availability zones, then there will be more questions in the upcoming series. There will be more questions in this video as well. So stay with me till the end of this video to understand more about them. For any single instance virtual machine using premium SSD or ultra disk for all operating system disks and data disks, we guarantee you will have virtual machine connectivity of at least 99.9%. For any single instance virtual machine using standard SSD managed disks for operating system disk and data disks, we guarantee you will have virtual machine connectivity of at least 99.5%. For any single instance virtual machine using standard HDD managed disk for operating system disks and data disks, we guarantee you will have virtual machine connectivity of at least 95%. So folks, as the SSD changes to HDD, the guaranteed uptime goes down. Similarly, when you move from availability zones to availability sets, the guaranteed uptime comes down from 99.99 to 99.95. There are very small differences in these numbers, so try to remember them, as this is something which can only be found in the documentation. Question number 263, select the answer that correctly completes the sentence. An Azure container instance is an example of and which of the following: compute service, identity service, networking service, or storage service? And the correct answer here, folks, is compute service. Azure container instance is an example of an Azure compute service. Question number 264. Again, you have to complete a sentence. Application Insights is a feature of which of the following: Azure Advisor, Azure Application Gateway, Azure Arc, or Azure Monitor? And here the correct answer is Azure Monitor. Application Insights is a feature of Azure Monitor. Let's look at question number 265. A company wants to host a mission critical application on a set of virtual machines within Microsoft Azure. They want to ensure they can set up the infrastructure in Azure to guarantee the maximum possible uptime for the application. Which of the following can you make use of in Azure to fulfill this requirement? You need to choose two options here, and your options are resource groups, availability zones, resource tags, and availability sets. To ensure maximum uptime for a mission critical application hosted on virtual machine within Microsoft Azure, you can make use of availability zones and availability sets. So friends, availability sets are logical grouping of VMs that reduce the chance of correlated failures, bringing down related VMs at the same time. Availability sets place VMs in different fault domains for better reliability, especially beneficial if a region doesn't support availability zones. When using availability sets, create 2 or more VMs within an availability sets. Using 2 or more VMs in a availability set helps highly available applications and meet the 99.9% Azure SLA. There's no extra cost for using availability sets. You only pay for each VM instance you create. So it would be very beneficial for you if you use availability sets, as it will provide you high availability and you are not even going to pay anything extra. Availability sets offer improved VM to VM latencies compared to availability zones. Folks, if you don't know availability zones till now, we are going to read about it as well. Since VMs in availability set are allocated in closer proximity, availability sets have fault isolation for many possible failures, minimizing single points of failure and offering high availability. Availability sets are still susceptible to certain shared infrastructure failures like data center network failure, which can affect multiple fault domains. For more reliability than availability sets offer, use availability zones. Availability zones offer the highest reliability since each VM is deployed in multiple data centers, protecting you from loss of either power, networking, or cooling in an individual data center. If your highest priority is the best reliability for your workload, replicate your VMs across multiple availability zones. But friends, if you use availability zones, you have to pay extra. So as compared to availability sets, if you are using availability zones, you have to pay a bit more. Now, how do availability sets work? Each virtual machine in your availability set is assigned an update domain and a fault domain by the underlying Azure platform. Each availability set can be configured with up to 3 fault domains and 20 update domains. Friends, try to remember this, as this can be a question in Azure Fundamentals exam, that how many fault domains does the availability set support and how many update domains does the availability set support. These configurations can't be changed once the availability set has been created. Update domain indicates group of virtual machines and underlying physical hardware that can be rebooted at the same time. When more than 5 virtual machines are configured within a single availability set with 5 fault update domains, the 6th virtual machine is placed into the same update domain as the first virtual machine. The 7th is the same update domain as the second virtual machine, and so on. The order of update domains being rebooted may not proceed sequentially during planned maintenance, but only one update domain is rebooted at a time. So basically, let's say if you have 5 VMs in 5 update domains, so only one VM will be rebooted at a time, because only one update domain is going to be rebooted at a time. That means you can ensure that 80% of your infrastructure is available at the same time. This is again one of the questions that you can expect in exam, that you are given 5 virtual machines that are in 5 update domains, and at a particular time, what can you expect the number of VMs to go down or to remain up? So it is important that you understand how update domains work and how fault domains work. Now, fault domains define the group of virtual machines that share a common power source and network switch. By default, the virtual machines configured within your availability set are separated across up to 3 fault domains. While placing your virtual machines into an availability set doesn't protect your application from operating system or application-specific failures, it does limit the impact of potential physical hardware failures, network outages, or power interruptions. VMs are also aligned with the disk fault domains. This alignment ensures that all the managed disks attached to a VM are within the same fault domain. So friends, I hope now you understand availability sets and fault domains and update domains in a better way. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. Let's now understand what are availability zones. Many Azure regions provide availability zones, which are separated group of data centers within a region. Availability zones are close enough to have low latency connections to other availability zones. They are connected by a high performance network with a round trip latency of less than 2 milliseconds.
However, availability zones are far enough apart to reduce the likelihood that more than one will be affected by local outages or weather. Availability zones have independent power, cooling, and networking infrastructure. They are designed so that if one zone experiences any outage, then regional services, capacity, and high availability are supported by the remaining zones. They help your data stay synchronized and accessible when things go wrong. Data center locations are selected by using rigorous vulnerability risk assessment criteria. This process identifies all significant data center specific risks and considers shared risk between availability zones. Now, folks, there is a diagram on your screen. Basically, Azure Region 1 has 3 availability zones, and each availability zones has multiple data centers. Even though you can just see one photo in this on the screen, however, it says data center and then it is a S. So availability zone can have a single data center. It can also have a multiple data center. Then again, Azure Region 2 has multiple availability zones, whereas Azure Region 4 and Azure Region 5 do not have multiple availability zones. They don't even have an availability zone. They just have data centers. This is what we were talking about in first question, that all regions do not support availability zones. And you can see here from this diagram, it is very much evident that all the regions do not have availability zones. Friends, this is question number 266. A company needs to implement a solution within Microsoft Azure. Below are the key requirements for this solution. Ability to store JSON documents. Ensure low latency access to data from around the world. Which of the following should you consider for this requirement? Your options are Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure Cosmos DB, Azure SQL Database, SQL Server Stretch Database. In Azure Cosmos DB API for NoSQL, items are stored as JSON. Azure Cosmos DB is a globally distributed database system that allows you to read and write data from the local replicas of your database, which satisfies the second requirement of this question, friends. Question number 267. Your organization is moving to the Azure cloud in order to take advantage of consumption-based expense model of cloud computing. Which of the following is an advantage of the consumption-based expense model? You need to choose two options. The importance of estimating future resource needs, the ability to pay for more resources when they are needed, the ability to stop paying for resources that are no longer needed, the ability to make one-time upfront expenditures to purchase or secure tangible resources. And friends, the advantage of consumption-based expense model in Azure cloud computing include the ability to pay for more resources when they are needed and the ability to stop paying for resources that are no longer needed. In a consumption-based model, organizations can scale their resources up or down based on demand. This flexibility allows them to relocate or probably allocate additional resources as needed to meet workload demands without over-provisioning or incurring unnecessary costs during periods of low activity. And also, organizations have the flexibility to stop paying for resources that are no longer needed. They can decommission or scale down resources when they are no longer needed, thereby optimizing cost and avoiding unnecessary expenses. This is question number 268. Your company's Active Directory forest includes thousands of user accounts. You have been informed that all network resources will be migrated to Azure. Thereafter, on-premise data center will be retired post-migration. You are required to employ a strategy that reduces the effect on users once the planned migration is completed. And the solution you choose is you plan to require Azure multi-factor authentication. Does this solution meet the goal? And my friends, this solution does not meet the goal. You should sync your on-premise Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID using Microsoft Entra Connect. Once the sync is completed, then the impact to users can be avoided whenever the on-premise data center is retired. Friends, before we move forward and look at the next question, if you are liking the content, do not forget to hit the like button and post a comment on the video, as algorithm unfortunately rates the video based on the comments and likes. Question number 269. A company has a set of virtual machines deployed within Microsoft Azure. One of the machines was down due to issues with the underlying Azure infrastructure. The server was down for an extended period of time and breached the standard SLA defined by Microsoft. How will Microsoft reimburse the downtime cost? And your options are by directly sending money to the customer's bank account, by spinning up another virtual machine free of cost for the client, by providing a service free of cost to use for a specific duration of time, by providing service credits to the customer. And the correct answer, folks, here is by providing service credits to the customer. So friends, let's read through this section to understand service credits in more detail. Service outages, service level agreement issues credit. For credit requests for service outages, SLA credits from Microsoft are defined based on which services were affected. For example, if your customer has an Office 365 suite but only experienced a SharePoint outage, the SLA credit is approved only for SharePoint and not for customer's entire plan. Credits are prorated based on the service affected and the duration of the outage. To see the type of scenarios that qualify for SLA credits, see this online service consolidated SLA document, which we are not going to see at this point. This information applies to services sold through the cloud solution provider program as well. For claims related to Microsoft Azure, credit requests must be submitted within 2 months from the end of the billing month in which the incident occurred. So this is something which is critical for submitting this reimburse request. For claims related to all other services, credit requests must be submitted within 1 month from the end of the billing month in which the incident occurred. You must provide evidence that the customer was affected by the outage and that they requested an SLA credit. Customer's tenant ID and outage ID, which can be obtained from the Service Help dashboard, must be provided. The customer email submitted as evidence must come from the domain of the affected tenant. Email from a personal address is not acceptable. Question number 270. Which of the following statements about Azure cost and VM management is true? And your options are: deleting a VM automatically deletes all its data disks and public IP addresses as well. When a VM is stopped deallocated, it will not incur any more charges. If you need to move a VM reservation to another region, you have to make a new VM reservation and exchange the old one for new one. Resources themselves do not cost anything. The resource group containing them incur charges. Friends, first statement is false. Deleting a VM in Azure does not automatically delete its associated data disks or public IP addresses. You have the option to retain or delete these resources separately. Second statement is also false. When you stop or deallocate a VM in Azure, it stops consuming compute resources and you are not billed for the VM compute usage. However, you may still incur charges for associated storage resources. Third statement is correct, my friends. Azure reserved virtual machine instances are typically associated with a specific region and instance type. If you need to change the region or instance type covered by a reserved instance, you indeed need to purchase a new reservation for the desired configuration and potentially exchange or cancel the old one. And the last statement is obviously incorrect. In Azure, resources themselves do incur cost based on their usage. Resource groups are logical containers used for organizing and managing Azure resources, but they do not directly incur charges. Charges are based on the resources provisioned within them and their usage, not the resource group themselves. This is question number 271 of the series, folks. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is data that is stored in an Azure storage account automatically has at least 3 copies. That's correct, folks. At least 3 copies of data are maintained when stored in an Azure storage account. All data that is copied to an Azure storage account is backed up automatically to another Azure data center. This statement is incorrect, friends. By default, locally redundant storage is selected for a storage account, which replicates your data 3 times within the same data center. You have the option to choose geo-redundant storage or read access geo-redundant storage, which replicates your data to another data center in a different region for additional protection against regional disasters or outages. And the third statement is an Azure storage account can contain up to 2 terabyte of data and up to 1 million files. This one is also incorrect, friends. Keyword which made this statement incorrect is the word up to 2 TB of data. Default maximum storage account capacity is 5 petabytes of data. Question number 272. Match the serverless solution to the correct characteristic. Now the instructions are to answer, drag the appropriate serverless solution from the column on the left to its characteristic on the right. Each serverless solution may be used once, more than once, or not at all. And the serverless solutions given are Azure Functions, Azure Logic Apps. And the characteristics are executes code, is always stateful, runs only in the cloud. And friends, the first one would be Azure Functions. Azure Functions is an event-driven serverless compute platform that helps you develop more efficiently using the programming language of your choice. It can be either stateful or stateless and can run locally or in the cloud. Now, the second characteristic is always stateful. And the right choice would be Azure Logic Apps, which is always stateful, where you create and run automated workflows with little to no code. And the third characteristic is runs only in the cloud. And for that, the correct answer is Azure Logic Apps. You can't run Logic Apps on local and can only execute them in the cloud. Let's look at next question. Match the cloud service models to the appropriate solutions. This is similar to what you saw just now. However, here we are talking about cloud service models and you need to map them to the appropriate solutions. And the models given are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And the solutions given are a cloud-based file server, a cloud-based accounting system, a cloud-based service for custom apps. And friends, a cloud-based file server is an example of infrastructure as a service. You should not confuse it with Azure Files, which is the platform as a service offering. A cloud-based accounting system is an example of software as a service offering. Because users can access the software through a web server or a web browser or a client application without the need for local installation or maintenance. And a cloud-based service for custom apps is an example of platform as a service offering. Because the cloud provider is offering a platform that allows developers to build, deploy, and manage custom applications without having to worry about the underlying infrastructure. Friends, this is one of the image on the Microsoft website, which you can refer to understand what all is categorized into platform services and what all is categorized into infrastructure services. This diagram also tells you about the hybrid cloud requirements and security and management requirements. So If you would like to get an insight on which services are considered as a platform as a service offering or infrastructure as a service offering, you can go through this image. The link is already on your screen at the moment. This is question number 274. Your Azure environment contains multiple Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that a virtual machine named VM1 is accessible from the internet over HTTP. And the solution you provide is you modify an Azure Traffic Manager profile. You need to tell whether this meets the goal or not. And friends, modifying an Azure Traffic Manager profile does not meet the goal of providing access to virtual machine from the internet over HTTP. Azure Traffic Manager is a DNS-based traffic load balancer that enables you to distribute traffic across multiple endpoints. It is typically used for improving the availability and performance of your applications. Friends, let's look at one more variation of this question. And here the solution is you modify an Azure firewall. And I think this will partially meet the goal. You would need to make changes to firewall and network security groups as well to allow access. Question number 276. You have 4 options, and basically there is a statement, a common platform for deploying objects to a cloud infrastructure and for implementing consistency across the Azure environment. And your options are Azure policies provide, resource groups provide, Azure Resource Manager templates provide, and management groups provide. And friends, the correct answer here is Azure Resource Manager templates provide, a common platform for deploying objects to a cloud infrastructure and for implementing consistency across the Azure environment. Folks, you might be tempted to choose Azure policies here, but Azure policies are used to define rules for what can be deployed and how it should be deployed. While this can help in ensuring consistency, Azure policies do not provide the common platform for deploying objects to a cloud infrastructure. Next question. Azure Cost Management tool can help you answer which questions? And your options are: how much would I save by migrating to the cloud? What will my Azure resource cost once I deploy it? Which deployed Azure resource are underutilized? How have other developers addressed the deployment issues I have encountered? And friends, the correct answer here is option C, which deployed Azure resources are underutilized. Azure Cost Management tool can be integrated with Azure Advisor to identify underutilized resources and save costs by either shutting down unused resources or right-size underutilized resources. So friends, I hope you are understanding the questions, and if you have any doubts, please post them in the comment section. Question number 278. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And your first statement is Azure Advisor can generate a list of Azure VMs that are protected by Azure Backup. Friends, Azure Advisor does the other way around. It provides recommendations on virtual machines that are not backed up and will let you enable backup on these virtual machines with just a few clicks. The second statement is, if you implement the security recommendations provided by Azure Advisor, your company's secure score will decrease. This statement is also incorrect. If you implement the security recommendations provided by Azure Advisor, your company's secure score in Azure will typically increase. And the third statement is, to maintain Microsoft support, you must implement the security recommendations provided by Azure Advisor within a period of 30 days. Folks, this statement is also incorrect. It is not mandatory to implement the recommendations provided by Azure Advisor. Question number 279. One common requirement to use SaaS model services on the public cloud is installation on your host machine. Instructions are: review the underlying text. If it makes the statement correct, select no changes needed. If the statement is incorrect, select the answer choice that makes the statement correct. And the underlying text here is installation. And your options are no changes needed, internet access, configuration of your application code, configuration of scaling and availability settings. And my friends, the correct answer here would be internet access. Software as a service model services are cloud-based applications that users access over the internet. Unlike traditional software where you need to install it on your local machine or server, SaaS applications are hosted and maintained by the service provider. Question number 280 of the series. Dash provides the global view of the status of Azure services, regions, and specific resources. And your options are Application Insights, Azure Advisor, Azure Service Health. And friends, the correct answer here is Azure Service Health. Azure Service Health provides a global view of the status of Azure services, regions, and specific resources. It helps you stay informed and up to date about the health and availability of Azure services and regions that your applications depend on. It provides real-time status updates, historical information, and proactive notifications about service incidents and planned maintenance events. This allows you to better manage and optimize the performance and reliability of your Azure services and applications. So friends, I hope you now understand why Azure Service Health has been chosen as the correct answer here. If you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. Friends, this is question number 281 of the series. You need to match the Azure services to their correct description. And the instructions are: you drag the appropriate Azure service from the column on the left to its description on the right. Each service may be used once, more than once, or not at all. And the services given are Azure Functions, Azure App Service, Azure Virtual Machines, Azure Container Instances. And then on the right-hand side, there are some descriptions mentioned, which is provide operating system virtualization, provide portable environment for virtualized applications, used to build, deploy, and scale web apps, provide a platform for serverless code. And friends, the first answer here is Azure Container Instances, which provide operating system virtualization. Do not get confused by Azure virtual machines in this case, as virtual machines provide hardware virtualization and not OS virtualization. And next description corresponds to again Azure Container Instances because they provide a portable environment for virtualized applications. They offer a lightweight and portable way to run Docker containers in the cloud, making it easier to deploy and manage containerized applications without the need to manage virtual machines or container orchestration services like Kubernetes. And the third description corresponds to Azure App Service. You would use Azure App Service to build, deploy, and scale web apps. You should definitely know the next one already, and the service that corresponds to this is Azure Functions, as they provide a platform for serverless code and allow developers to write snippets of code that respond to specific events without worrying about the underlying server infrastructure. Question number 282. Your Azure environment contains multiple Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that a virtual machine named VM1 is accessible from the internet over HTTP. What are two possible solutions? And your options are: modify an Azure Traffic Manager profile, modify a network security group, modify a DDoS protection plan, modify an Azure firewall. And friends, the correct answers here are option B and option D. Network security groups act as virtual firewalls for controlling traffic to virtual machines in Azure. To allow HTTP traffic to VM1, You can modify the NSG associated with the subnet or network interface of VM1 to allow incoming traffic on port 80, which is HTTP. You need to create an inbound security rule following traffic on port 80 to reach VM1. Azure Firewall is a managed cloud-based network security service that protects your Azure virtual network resources. You can configure Azure Firewall to allow HTTP traffic to reach VM1. This involves setting up a network rule in Azure Firewall to allow inbound HTTP traffic, again on port 80, to the specific IP address or range where VM1 is located. Question number 283. What provides a unified way to project and manage non-Azure resources in Azure Resource Manager? And your options are Azure Migrate, Azure AD Connect, Azure Arc, or Azure Front Door. And friends, the correct answer here is Azure Arc, which is option C. So friends, let's understand Azure Arc in a bit more detail, as this is very critical to managing the Azure and non-Azure resources as well. Companies struggle to control and govern increasingly complex environments that extend across data centers, multiple clouds, and edge. Each environment and cloud possesses its own set of management tools, and new DevOps and IT Ops operational models can be hard to implement across resources. Azure Arc simplifies governance and management by delivering a consistent multi-cloud and on-premise management platform. Azure Arc provides a centralized, unified way to, let's look at what it can be used for. Manage your entire environment together by projecting your existing non-Azure and on-premise resources into Azure Resource Manager. This is what was asked in our question. Manage virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters, and database as if they are running in Azure. Use familiar Azure services and management capabilities regardless of where your resources live. Continue using traditional IT ops while introducing DevOps practices to support new cloud-native patterns in your environment. Configure custom locations as an abstraction layer on top of Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters and cluster extensions. Currently, Azure Arc allows you to manage the following resources types hosted outside of Azure. The first one is servers. Manage Windows and Linux virtual servers and physical servers hosted outside of Azure. Kubernetes clusters. Attach and configure Kubernetes clusters running anywhere with multiple supported distributions. Azure Data Services. Run Azure Data Services on premises, at the edge, and in public clouds using Kubernetes and the infrastructure of your choice. SQL Manage Instance and PostgreSQL services are currently available. SQL Server. Extend Azure services to SQL Server instances hosted outside of Azure. Virtual machines. Provision, resize, delete, and manage virtual machines based on VMware, vSphere, or Azure Stack HCI, and enable VM self-service through role-based access. So folks, currently these are the things that are supported by Azure Arc. Basically, you can use Azure Arc to manage your on-premise servers, and you can also use it to manage your workloads that are hosted in other cloud providers. Question number 284. Match the cloud computing benefits to the appropriate requirements, and the instructions are same. You need to drag the appropriate benefit from the column on the left to its requirement on the right. Each benefit may be used once, more than once, or not at all. And the benefits are agility, elasticity, and disaster recovery. And the requirements are the ability to dynamically scale the resources available to a cloud app, the ability to use cloud-based backup services to restore resources in the event of an outage, the ability to quickly deploy and configure cloud-based resources as app requirements change. Friends, elasticity or scalability is the ability to dynamically scale the resources available to a cloud app. Second requirement is talking about restoring in the event of an outage, which is directly related to disaster recovery, benefit of cloud computing. And the third requirement is the easiest one as per me, as we all work in agile environments, where we try to deliver things as soon as possible, which you can relate with the requirement of quickly deploying and configuring the cloud-based resources. Question number 285, select the appropriate answer choice which completes the sentence correctly. All Azure services that are in public preview are, and your options are provided without any documentation, only configurable from Azure CLI, excluded from service level agreements, only configurable from the Azure portal. And my friends, the correct answer here is they are excluded from service level agreements. Question number 286. You plan to reduce ongoing Azure expenditures. You need to identify which factors affect the cost of a resource. Which three factors should you identify? Your options are the volume of outbound data, the volume of inbound data, the service tier, the Azure region, the type of processed data. First factor that affects the costs of a resource in Azure is the volume of outbound data. As outbound data transfer from Azure services to the internet or other Azure region incurs cost based on the amount of data transferred. And the next factor that affects cost is service tier. Different service tiers, for example, basic, standard, premium, often come with different features, performance levels, and pricing structures. And the final factor that affects cost is the Azure region. Azure pricing can vary based on the geographic region where resources are deployed due to differences in data center costs and demand. Question number 287. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is, in an Azure virtual machine scale set, the virtual machines are configured identically. And this statement is correct, my friends. Let's look at next statement. The number of Azure virtual machines in a virtual machine scale set can increase automatically. This statement is also correct. And the third statement is the number of Azure virtual machines in a virtual machine scale set can decrease automatically. And this statement is also correct. So friends, I am now in Azure portal and in the creating a virtual machine scale set wizard. Let's try to create a virtual machine scale set and see and validate the options that we chose while answering question number 287. So the first one was, in an Azure virtual machine scale set, the virtual machines are configured identically. Now, if you scroll down in the wizard, in the instance details, you have to select an image. And if you click on this, it says choose the base operating system or application for the VM. This pretty much confirms that whenever new virtual machines will be spinned up by this virtual machine scale set, it is going to use the same image for all the machines. That means these all machines will be replica of each other. Now, the next part, basically the next two statements were the number of Azure virtual machines in a virtual machine scale set can increase automatically or can decrease automatically. So for that, we will look at the scaling options. What is scaling mode? Manual scale contains a fixed instance count. Custom scale, auto scale allows to scale the capacity of virtual machine scale sets on any schedule based on any metrics. So there are two options here: manually update the capacity, maintain a fixed number of instances, or auto scaling. So let's look at auto scaling, because the question was talking about it can change the virtual machine instances, whether it is increasing or decreasing automatically. Now, if you select auto scaling, there are predefined settings showing up here. Let's click on configure and see whether we can change those settings or not. So it comes up with a default condition. And if I try to edit the default condition, you can see the initial instance count of the virtual machine scale set is defined as 2. That means when the virtual machine scale set is initialized, it will have 2 virtual machines in it. And here the maximum defines that whenever the scaling actions happens, which we will shortly see, the maximum instances that can be attained using those scaling actions is 20. You cannot go beyond 20. Now, scale out is defined as if the CPU threshold is greater than 80%, the number of virtual machines will increase by 1. And similarly, the scale-in is defined as if the CPU threshold is less than 20%, the number of VMs will decrease by 1. And query duration is set to 10. This is the duration of time the autoscale engine will look back for the metric usage average. This is to allow your metrics to stabilize. Basically, this is a cooldown period. And then at the bottom, you can specify the schedule, but this is the auto created default condition, so we cannot modify it. Let's try to create a scaling condition and see if there are any different options. Now here you can see in the schedule, you get whether you want to specify a particular time at which these scaling events need to happen, or you can set a recurring schedule that you need to repeat at a specific days, and then you select the time zone, and then you select the day on which the scaling needs to happen. If you know that your application experiences more load at a certain time of the day, so you can define a scaling schedule that the virtual machine scale set increases the number of virtual machines at that particular time of the day. So friends, I hope you now understand why all these three statements were correct, and you also understand how a virtual machine scale set works. If you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. This is question number 288. Where does Azure Monitor store event data? Your options are an Azure Blob Storage account, Azure Storage Queue, Azure SQL Database, a Log Analytics workspace. Azure Monitor stores event data primarily in a Log Analytics workspace. These workspaces are designed to collect, analyze, and act on telemetry from your cloud and on-premise environments. Log Analytics enables you to search, visualize, and analyze log data in real time. Question number 289. In the infrastructure as a service cloud service model, which two components are the responsibility of the cloud service provider? And your options are the configuration and maintenance of storage, the installation and configuration of the operating system, maintaining the hardware, the network configuration, physical security of the data center infrastructure. And friends, the first responsibility of cloud service provider among the given options will be maintaining the hardware. The cloud service provider is responsible for managing the physical hardware infrastructure, including servers, networking equipment, and storage devices. And the second responsibility among the given options will be physical security of the data center infrastructure. The provider ensures to maintain appropriate physical security measures to protect the data centers where the infrastructure is hosted against unauthorized access, theft, and environmental hazards. This is question number 290. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And your first statement is you can have two Azure storage accounts that have the same name in the same Azure subscription. Friends, this statement is incorrect. The next statement is you can have two Azure storage accounts that have the same name in different Azure regions. This statement is also incorrect. And the third statement is you can have two Azure storage accounts that have the same name in different Azure subscriptions. And friends, this statement is also incorrect. So friends, I am now on the Microsoft documentation regarding the storage account name. And this says when naming your storage account, keep these rules in mind. Storage account names must be between 3 and 24 characters in length and may contain numbers and lower case letters only. And the second requirement is your storage account name must be unique within Azure. No two storage accounts can have the same name. This is the reason all the three statements were incorrect. There cannot be two storage accounts with same name across the Azure globally, irrespective of whether you are creating storage accounts into subscriptions, or you are creating storage accounts within the same subscription, or you are creating storage accounts into different Azure regions. They cannot have same name globally. So that is why all of the three statements were incorrect. And you can see there is another rule that you need to keep in mind. So you should be across this rule, as well as there can be different questions based on this rule. This is question number 291 of the series. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is Azure Arc can manage physical servers that run Linux. This statement is correct, my friends. Azure Arc can manage physical servers that run Linux. Next statement is Azure Arc can manage Azure Kubernetes clusters at scale. This statement is also correct. Let's look at third statement. Azure Arc can manage a third-party database solution hosted outside of Azure. This statement is incorrect. Currently, Azure Arc allows you to manage the following resource types hosted outside of Azure. The first one is servers. Manage Windows and Linux physical servers and virtual machines hosted outside of Azure. This is the reason why the first statement was correct. And the second one is related to Kubernetes clusters. Attach and configure Kubernetes clusters running anywhere with multiple supported distributions. This is the reason which led to choosing second statement as the correct answer. Now the third one here is Azure Data Services. Run Azure Data Services on-premise, at the edge, and in public clouds using Kubernetes and the infrastructure of your choice. SQL managed instance and PostgreSQL preview services are currently available. So friends, there is no statement related to this in our current question, but you should know about it, as this can form a different variation to the question. The next one is related to SQL servers. Extend Azure services to SQL Server instances hosted outside of Azure. Now, friends, this is related to the third statement that we have in the question, but it is specifically talking about SQL Server. However, the statement in our question was talking about third-party database solutions, which is a lot more than SQL Server. That's why we have chosen that this statement is incorrect, because as per the documentation, only SQL Server is supported. And there was a mention of PostgreSQL in the previous data services section, so we would consider PostgreSQL as well supported, but the third-party databases are a lot more than just SQL Server and PostgreSQL. That is why this statement is incorrect. And the final statement here is virtual machines. Provision, resize, delete, and manage virtual machines based on VMware vSphere or Azure Stack at CI, and enable VM self-service through role-based access. So these are all what is supported by Azure Arc currently. Question number 292. You need to manage Azure by using Azure Cloud Shell. Which Azure portal icon should you select? Now in front of you is an exhibit from Azure portal. You need to tell which of the icons should you select to launch Azure Cloud Shell. And friends, the correct answer is now highlighted on your screen in a red box. This is the icon that you need to use to launch Azure Cloud Shell. Question number 293. There are four options basically: application rules, network address translation rules, network rules, service tags. In Azure, Firewall enables users on the internet to access a server on a virtual network. And the correct answer here is network address translation rules. Azure Virtual Network NAT is a network address translation service running in Azure. With Azure Virtual Network NAT, you can provide secure outbound connectivity to virtual instances in a private subnet so they can connect outside your virtual network. Question number 294. You have an Azure Sentinel workspace. you need to automate responses to threats detected by Azure Sentinel. What should you use? And your options are adaptive network hardening in Azure Security Center, Azure Service Health, Azure Sentinel Workbooks, adaptive application controls in Azure Security Centers. And friends, the correct answer is option C, Azure Sentinel Workbooks. Let's read through, visualize, and monitor your data by using workbooks in the Microsoft Sentinel section to understand this in a bit more detail. After you have connected your data sources to Microsoft Sentinel, visualize and monitor the data using workbooks in Microsoft Sentinel. Microsoft Sentinel allows you to create custom workbooks across your data or using existing workbook templates available with packaged solutions or as standalone content from the Content Hub. These templates allow you to quickly gain insights across your data as soon as you connect a data source. Now, if we scroll further, this article tells you about how to use workbook templates and create new workbooks, but we are not going to go through them at this point. But if you are interested in knowing more about workbooks and how to create and use them, feel free to go through this URL. This is question number 296. And again, in this question, you need to read few statements and you need to select whether the statement is right or wrong. And the first statement is a network security group will block all network traffic by default. This statement is incorrect. We'll look at more detail on why we have chosen these statements as right or wrong in few minutes by going into the Azure portal. Meanwhile, let's look at second statement. Application security groups can be specified as part of network security group rules. This statement is correct, my friends. And the third statement is network security groups always include inbound security rules and outbound security rules. This is also correct. So friends, as I said earlier, we are now in Azure portal and we will try to validate all the three statements which we just went through. In preparation of that, we will first create a network security group. So how we do it, we go into the network security wizard, we click on create new, we select a resource group where our network security group is going to stay. We'll probably name it test NSG. And we'll create it in the Southeast Asia region. We are not going to assign it any tags. Let's click review and create. So this is running a validation at the moment and the validation has passed. We will hit create now and the network security group should be created in few minutes. So friends, the deployment has got completed. We now have a network security group created. We'll just click on go to resource and here you can see a network security group has got created successfully. Now comes the part to validate the statements. The first statement was a network security group will block all network traffic by default. However, here you can see with the network security group, you have few inbound and outbound rules created by default where an allow part is there. Like in the inbound security rules, you have two allow rules created by default, which is allow VNet inbound and allow Azure load balancer. And then similarly in the outbound security rules as well, you have two default allow groups created. That is the reason the statement was incorrect. Now before going to the second statement, let's validate the third statement, which was saying network security group always includes inbound and outbound security rules, which you would already know by now. There are some inbound and outbound security rules which have been created by default. So this statement is correct. Now the second statement was application security groups can be specified as part of network security group rules. So to validate that, let's go to inbound security rules and try to create an inbound security rule. Now, when you add an inbound security rule in the source, you get option to select application security group as well. This is the reason we have chosen second statement as correct. Now, friends, while we are in this wizard, you have other options to choose as well in source. So for example, you wanted to allow connectivity from the whole internet. So you would choose service tag here, which gives you option to choose internet, virtual network, Azure load balancer, and those sort of things. So If you are someone who has very limited knowledge of network security groups, then this wizard is something which will tell you about how you use network security groups. If you select my IP address, it will choose your public IP address by default. And then if you choose IP addresses, you get to specify a CIDR range of the IP addresses from which you want to allow or deny connectivity. You get to choose the protocols, you get to choose the destination port ranges, and then you can create the rule by clicking add. Similarly, if we go to the outbound security rules, if you just click on add, again, the options are same. It's just that the earlier you were creating inbound security rule, and now you're going to create an outbound security rule. This is question number 297. Match the cloud computing benefits to the appropriate requirements. And in the instructions you have to answer, drag the appropriate term from the column on the left to its description on the right. Each benefit may be used once, more than once, or not at all. And your terms are authorization, multi-factor authentication, which is MFA, and single sign-on, which is SSO. Now, the first statement or description is the ability to use the same credentials to access multiple resources and applications from different providers. And this corresponds to single sign-on. The next description is the process of identifying the access level of a user or service, which corresponds to authorization. And the final statement is requires several elements to identify a user or a service, which corresponds to multi-factor authentication. This is question number 298. Which two features or services can be integrated with Azure Monitor? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. And your options are Azure Status, Application Insights, Azure Advisor, Log Analytics, Azure Service Health. And friends, the correct answers are option B and option D, Application Insights and Log Analytics. Question number 299. You have an Azure subscription. You need to use Azure Cloud Shell to run a deployment script. What should you use to access Cloud Shell? Your options are Azure Resource Manager, Microsoft Visual Studio, a Windows command prompt, a web browser. And the correct answer is option D, a web browser. Let's look at question number 300. Again, you will be presented with a series of statements, and you need to tell whether these statements are correct or incorrect. You can deploy Azure Resource Manager templates by using the Azure portal. And this statement is correct. The next statement is Azure Resource Manager templates can define infrastructure by using code. This is also correct. And the third and final statement is each Azure resource to be deployed requires a separate Azure Resource Manager template. This statement is incorrect. You can use one template to create multiple Azure resources. If you have not used ARM templates till now, go through my previous videos where I have used ARM templates to create different resources in a same ARM template. One of the example could be you are trying to create a virtual machine, and as part of virtual machine creation, you create lots of dependencies, which includes public IP address or network interface card or storage or disk. Lots of dependent things need to be created first. That is why this statement is incorrect, because you really don't need different ARM templates to create different resources. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video, folks. If you haven't looked at other parts of the series yet, then explore them as well to get the maximum benefit from our content. Link to the playlist is available in the description section of this video. And friends, if you have passed the Azure Fundamentals exam using our content, then feel free to tag us in your LinkedIn celebration post and share our content in your network as well. Stay tuned for more parts in our Azure Fundamentals exam practice question series.